The red and blue lights flashed in the judge's rearview mirror, cutting through the darkness like a warning siren in the night. Judge Marcus Price, a respected figure in the city and known for his unflinching pursuit of justice, pulled his black sedan to the side of the empty suburban street. He adjusted his glasses, his hands steady on the steering wheel, though his pulse raced. He wasn't speeding. His registration was up to date. Why was he being stopped? The officer approached the car, flashlight in hand, his gait slow and deliberate. Marcus lowered his window, the cool night air rushing in. "License and registration," the officer barked. His tone was sharp, almost accusatory. Marcus handed over his documents without protest. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The cop squinted at the license, then at Marcus. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, his hand drifting toward the holster on his hip. Marcus's stomach sank. This wasn't routine. "Officer, Now," the cop barked, his voice rising. Marcus complied, stepping out into the chilly night air. The officer towered over him, his hand still on his gun. "Put your hands on the car," the cop ordered. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus began, his calm demeanor giving way to urgency. "I'm Judge Marcus Price, and—" "I don't care who you are," the officer interrupted, shoving Marcus against the car. The flashlight clattered to the ground, and for a brief moment, silence fell over the street. That's when it happened. The officer grabbed Marcus's wrist, pulling his arm behind his back with unnecessary force. Marcus winced but didn't resist. And then the cop said it, words that would later spark a nationwide uproar. "I knew you people couldn't be trusted. Always pretending to be someone you're not," the cop spat, his grip tightening. Marcus froze. His mind raced as adrenaline surged through his veins. People like him, pretending. He had spent his entire life proving himself, climbing the ladder, and earning every ounce of respect he commanded in the courtroom. "Officer, you're making a grave mistake," Marcus said, his voice steady but sharp. "Grave mistake? The only mistake here is you thinking you're above the law," the cop sneered. A car approached in the distance, its headlights illuminating the scene. Marcus's heart sank further as he thought about what might happen if this escalated. He needed to defuse the situation, but before he could speak, the officer reached for his radio. And then, the unimaginable happened. The car that had approached screeched to a halt. A woman, dressed in a tailored pantsuit, jumped out, her face a mix of fury and shock. "Officer, what on earth are you doing?" she demanded. Marcus's eyes widened. It was Clara Weston, his courtroom assistant. The officer froze, his hand still gripping Marcus's arm. "Ma'am, step back." "No, I won't step back," Clara shot back. "Do you even know who this is?" The cop's face twisted with confusion and annoyance. "I don't care who he is. He's under suspicion." "For what?" Clara cut him off, her voice rising. "Judge Price is one of the most respected legal figures in this state. What's your probable cause for detaining him?" The cop's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Let him go," Clara demanded. "Now." The tension in the air was suffocating. The officer's grip loosened, but he didn't release Marcus entirely. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. And then, a chilling realization hit Marcus. This wasn't just about him. This was bigger than one man, one stop, or one badge. But before he could say anything, the cop muttered something under his breath, something Clara didn't miss. Her eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" The officer looked like a deer caught in headlights. Clara turned to Marcus, her voice trembling with anger. "We can't let this slide. This is going public." And with that, the camera on Clara's phone began recording. The air was thick with tension as Clara's phone recorded the unfolding scene. The officer, visibly flustered, backed away from Marcus, but his defensive posture betrayed his unwillingness to admit fault. "Ma'am, you need to stop recording and step back," he said, his voice shaky but stern. Clara didn't flinch. "Why? Are you afraid of being held accountable for your actions?" Her voice rang out with an authority that rivaled the officer's. Marcus straightened his jacket, brushing off the indignity of being manhandled. "Officer," he began, his tone measured but firm, "this could have been resolved calmly. Instead, you chose intimidation." Now, I suggest we end this situation here, professionally. The officer hesitated, his eyes darting between Marcus and Clara. I was just following protocol, he muttered defensively. Protocol? Clara shot back. Does protocol involve racial profiling and abuse of power? Because that's exactly what this is. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Phones emerged, their cameras adding to the scrutiny. The officer's demeanor shifted, his earlier bravado giving way to unease. Let me see that badge number, Clara demanded, zooming in with her camera. The world deserves to know who you are. Before the officer could respond, another patrol car pulled up, its siren cutting through the tense silence. A senior officer stepped out, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the rookie's agitation. What's going on here? The senior officer asked, his sharp eyes surveying the scene. The rookie jumped in, his words tumbling out in a jumbled defense. This man was acting suspiciously. I followed protocol. The senior officer held up a hand, silencing him. He turned to Marcus, his expression softening as recognition dawned. Judge Price. Marcus gave a curt nod. That's correct. And I'm glad someone here recognizes me. The senior officer's jaw tightened as he glanced at the rookie. Step aside, he ordered. The younger officer reluctantly obeyed, retreating to the squad car, his face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Judge Price, on behalf of the department, I deeply apologize for this incident, the senior officer said. I assure you, this behavior does not represent our values. Clara cut in, her phone still recording. Apologies won't cut it. This officer escalated a situation without cause. What steps are you taking to ensure this doesn't happen again? The senior officer looked visibly uncomfortable under her scrutiny but maintained his composure. Ma'am, we'll be conducting a full internal investigation. I understand your frustration, and I assure you, this will be addressed. Marcus spoke up, his voice steady. With all due respect, I've heard those promises before. Accountability needs to be more than just words. The senior officer nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. You're absolutely right, Judge Price. If you'd be willing, I'd like to meet with you and discuss this further in a formal setting. Marcus considered this for a moment. The fire in his chest urged him to press harder, to demand immediate action, but his judicial instincts told him to approach this strategically. I'll consider it, he said finally. But make no mistake, this incident will not be swept under the rug. The crowd murmured in agreement, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Clara lowered her phone but kept it ready. She wasn't about to let this moment go unrecorded. As the senior officer began dispersing the crowd, the rookie remained by the patrol car, his gaze locked on Marcus with a mixture of resentment and fear. Marcus caught the look and held it, unflinching. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As Clara and Marcus walked back to his car, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins, she turned to him. This has to go public, Marcus. People need to see what happened tonight. Marcus hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. It's not just about tonight, he said quietly. This is about changing the system that allows this to happen in the first place. Clara placed a reassuring hand on his arm. And that starts by telling your story. Let's make sure no one can look away. As they drove off into the night, the streetlights casting long shadows over the empty road, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Somewhere in the distance, the wheels of justice had started to turn, but whether they would lead to true change or more frustration remained to be seen. The following morning, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the steaming cup of coffee in front of him. The events of the previous night played over and over in his mind like a haunting reel. Despite his years on the bench, where he'd ruled over countless cases of injustice, experiencing it firsthand felt entirely different. Raw, humiliating, and infuriating. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was Clara. He answered on the first ring. Marcus, the video's going viral, she said, her voice a mix of excitement and urgency. I uploaded it late last night. It's already at 50,000 views, and climbing. Marcus's heart sank and soared simultaneously. You posted it? I had to, she replied. People need to see this. Check your inbox. I sent you a link. The comments are flooding in. Most people are outraged, but a few. Well, you can imagine. He sighed. The last thing he wanted was to wade through hateful messages from strangers. But Clara was right. This was bigger than him now. I'll take a look. Let's meet later to discuss next steps. Done. Noon at the coffee shop on 5th, she suggested. I'll be there. After the call, Marcus opened the link Clara had sent. The video began with the rookie officer's aggressive commands, followed by his chilling comment, "I knew you people couldn't be trusted." The camera shook slightly as Clara zoomed in on his badge number, capturing every detail. The video ended with Marcus walking back to his car, his dignity intact but his frustration palpable. The comments poured in faster than he could read. "This is sickening. When will this stop? Power-hungry cops like this give good officers a bad name. Why didn't Judge Price fight back harder? He should have stood his ground. I hate to say it, but this happens every day in America. Nothing will change." Marcus closed the tab, overwhelmed. The video was already becoming a flashpoint for debate, and he was at the center of it. Later that day, Marcus arrived at the coffee shop. Clara was already there, her laptop open and surrounded by papers. She waved him over, her face lit with determination. "You've been all over the news," she said as he sat down. "Every major outlet is picking up the story." "Not surprising," Marcus replied. "A black judge harassed by police? It's a headline that writes itself." Clara leaned in, her voice lowering. "But it's not just about the story. We need to decide what's next. Do we go public with a press conference? Do we file a formal complaint? What's the play?" Marcus took a sip of his coffee, his mind racing. He knew the system inside out, how it often silenced victims, twisted narratives, and protected its own. Yet, he also understood that public pressure was a powerful tool. "Filing a complaint is the logical first step," he said slowly. "But it's not enough. If we let this fade into the news cycle, nothing will change. We need to push for systemic reform, mandatory body cams, anti-bias training, better accountability." Clara nodded. "Agreed. But how do we get there? You can't take this on alone." "I won't," Marcus said firmly. "I'll reach out to some allies, civil rights groups, community leaders. This can't just be my fight." As they brainstormed strategies, the door to the coffee shop opened, and a familiar face walked in. It was the senior officer from the night before. He spotted Marcus and approached cautiously. "Judge Price," he said, tipping his head respectfully. "May I have a word?" Marcus gestured to an empty chair. "By all means." The officer sat down, his hands clasped tightly together. "First, let me apologize again for what happened. It was unacceptable, and I want you to know we're taking it very seriously." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied. "But apologies won't fix a broken system." "I understand," the officer said, his voice heavy. "That's why I wanted to speak with you. Our department has issues, we both know that. But we're trying to change. I'd like to invite you to work with us on improving our training and policies." Clara raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "So you want Marcus to clean up your mess?" The officer looked at her, then back at Marcus. "I want his expertise, his insight. We can't fix this without input from people like him." Marcus considered the offer. Part of him bristled at the idea of helping the same institution that had wronged him. But another part, the part that had dedicated his life to justice, saw an opportunity. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "But understand this, I won't be a figurehead. If I agree, it's on my terms." "Understood," the officer said, standing up. "I'll leave my card. Call me when you're ready." After he left, Clara turned to Marcus, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you seriously considering this?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But if we want real change, we need to attack this from every angle, inside and out." That night, as Marcus prepared for bed, his phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. "Judge Price," a deep voice asked. "Yes." "Who's this?" "This is Reverend Charles Howard. I saw the video, and I believe we can help each other. I lead a coalition focused on police reform, and I'd like to meet." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "I'd like that too, Reverend." "When and where?" "Tomorrow. Noon." My church, the Reverend said. Together, we can make them listen. As Marcus hung up, he felt the weight of the night before still heavy on his shoulders. But now, it was joined by something else. Determination. The sun hung high in the sky as Marcus parked outside the church. Its towering steeple cast a long shadow over the small crowd gathered outside. Community members milled about, some holding signs that read "Justice Now" and "Enough is Enough." The atmosphere was electric, a blend of anger and hope. Marcus adjusted his tie and stepped out of his car. As he approached the doors, a familiar figure greeted him, Reverend Charles Howard. The Reverend was a tall, imposing man with a deep, resonant voice that could command attention even in a crowded room. His handshake was firm, his expression earnest. "Judge Price," the Reverend said, his tone warm but urgent. "Thank you for coming. The people are ready to hear from you." "I'm not sure I'm the right person to lead this," Marcus admitted. "I'm a judge, not an activist." The Reverend placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're exactly the person they need. You've seen the system from the inside, and now you've experienced its failures firsthand. Your voice carries weight." Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. Together, they entered the church, where over 100 people waited in the pews. The room was buzzing with conversation, but as Marcus and the Reverend approached the podium, silence fell. Reverend Howard addressed the crowd first. "Brothers and sisters, we are here today because injustice continues to rear its ugly head in our community. But we are not powerless. Today, we are joined by someone who has lived through the injustice we fight against, a man who has dedicated his life to upholding the law, only to be targeted by those sworn to protect it." He turned to Marcus, gesturing for him to speak. Marcus stepped forward, the weight of the room pressing down on him. "I'm Judge Marcus Price," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Many of you know me from the courtroom. You've seen me rule on cases, uphold justice, and ensure fairness under the law. But last night, I wasn't a judge. I was just another black man on the side of the road, treated as a suspect instead of a citizen." The crowd murmured in agreement, their energy palpable. "What happened to me isn't unique," Marcus continued. "It happens every day, to fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. But here's the thing, I have a platform. I have a voice. And I'm going to use it." Applause erupted, the crowd rising to their feet. As Marcus continued, he outlined his vision for change: stricter accountability measures, independent oversight committees, and mandatory anti-bias training. He emphasized the importance of unity and collaboration, calling on the community to stand together. When he finished, the applause was deafening. Reverend Howard took the stage again, his booming voice rallying the crowd. "This is just the beginning, folks. Together, we will demand change and not rest until it happens." After the meeting, Marcus found himself surrounded by supporters, their words of encouragement filling the air. But amidst the positivity, Clara pulled him aside, her expression serious. "You're inspiring them, Marcus," she said. "But this is going to put a target on your back. Are you ready for that?" "I don't think anyone is ever ready for something like this," he admitted. "But if not me, then who?" Clara sighed, nodding. "Fair enough. Just know I've got your back." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. It was the senior officer who had approached him at the coffee shop. "Judge Price, I hope I'm not interrupting," the officer said when Marcus answered. "Not at all. What's on your mind?" Marcus replied, stepping away from the noise of the crowd. "I wanted to update you. The rookie officer involved in your incident has been suspended pending an investigation." Marcus felt a pang of satisfaction, but it was tempered by skepticism. "That's a start," he said. "But it's far from enough." "I understand," the officer said. "We're reviewing our policies, and I'd still like you to be involved in the process. We need someone like you to help guide us." Marcus paused. "I'll think about it. But this can't just be a PR move. If I agree, there need to be real commitments, public commitments." The officer hesitated before replying. "Agreed. Let's meet next week to discuss this in detail." As Marcus hung up, Clara approached, sensing something was on his mind. "More police outreach?" she asked. "They're dangling the carrot," Marcus said. "But I don't know if they're serious." "Only one way to find out," Clara replied. "But tread carefully. They'll try to use you to clean up their image. That evening, Marcus sat in his living room, the glow of the television lighting the room. News stations were playing the video Clara had uploaded, dissecting every moment. Analysts debated the implications, and the rookie officer's face was plastered on every screen. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Marcus wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it cautiously to find an envelope on the doorstep. No name, no address, just his title, Judge Price. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one chilling sentence, "Stay in your lane." Marcus's blood ran cold. Someone was trying to intimidate him, to silence him. But instead of fear, a fire ignited in his chest. If they thought this would make him back down, they didn't know Marcus Price. Marcus stared at the ominous note in his hands, the words, "Stay in your lane," etched into his mind. He set the paper down on the coffee table and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. Whoever sent this knew where he lived, and that meant they weren't just sending a message, they were making it personal. But instead of fear, Marcus felt resolve. They were trying to scare him, to silence him, and he couldn't let that happen. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Clara. "Clara, we've got a problem," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. "What's going on?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Someone left a threatening note at my door. No name, no address, just a warning. Stay in your lanes." Clara gasped. "Marcus, this is serious. You need to report it." "I know," Marcus said, standing and pacing the room. "But reporting it to the same system we're fighting feels counterintuitive." "Still," Clara pressed, "if something happens and you didn't take this seriously, it could be dangerous. You have to protect yourself." Marcus hesitated. She was right, of course, but it felt like every step he took was being watched. "I'll call it in," he finally said. "But I'm not stopping. They're trying to intimidate me, and that just tells me I'm on the right path." "Good," Clara replied. "And you're not alone in this. Don't forget that." The next morning, Marcus met with Detective Elena Vasquez, a seasoned officer who had built a reputation for fairness and integrity. She stood on his front porch, her no-nonsense demeanor immediately putting him at ease. "This is serious," Vasquez said after examining the note. "We've seen things like this before, attempts to intimidate whistleblowers, activists, even judges like yourself. Most of the time, they're empty threats, but we can't take chances. Do you think it's connected to the police department?" Marcus asked, crossing his arms. Vasquez frowned. "It's possible, but it could also be someone outside the department. This story has gone viral, and when that happens, it attracts all kinds of attention." Marcus nodded. "So what do we do?" "For now, I'll open an investigation," Vasquez said. "We'll sweep the area for cameras, check for fingerprints on the note, and see if we can trace its origin. In the meantime, I'd recommend you stay vigilant and consider some additional security." Marcus sighed. "Thank you, Detective. I appreciate your help." As she left, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was just the beginning. Whoever had left the note wasn't just trying to scare him, they were sending a clear message: back off, or else. Later that afternoon, Marcus attended his scheduled meeting with Reverend Howard and a coalition of community leaders. The group had convened in the church's meeting hall, a modest room adorned with banners reading "Justice for All" and "Reform Now." Reverend Howard began the meeting, outlining plans for a citywide march to bring attention to their demands: increased police accountability, independent oversight boards, and mandatory bias training. The room buzzed with energy as the leaders discussed logistics, rallying points, and media coverage. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood and addressed the group. "I've spent my entire career upholding the law, and I've always believed in its power to deliver justice. But last night, I received a reminder of why we're fighting. Someone left a threatening note at my home, telling me to stay in my lane." Gasps filled the room, followed by murmurs of outrage. "This is why we can't back down," Marcus continued. "They want us to be afraid, to give up. But we can't let fear dictate our actions. Change doesn't happen by staying silent. It happens when we refuse to be silenced." The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a surge of energy. The threat, as unsettling as it was, had only strengthened his resolve. That evening, as Marcus drove home, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short but chilling. Consider this your second warning." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Whoever was behind this wasn't playing games. When he arrived home, Clara was waiting for him, her laptop open on the coffee table. She'd come to work on strategy, but when Marcus showed her the text, her face paled. "This is escalating," she said. "You need more than just the police. We should loop in your contacts, someone you trust outside the department." Marcus nodded. "I know just the person." The next day, Marcus met with Rachel Edwards, a prominent civil rights attorney and an old friend. They sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of legal briefs and awards for her work in fighting systemic injustice. "Marcus, this is serious," Rachel said after reading the note and the text. "Whoever's behind this is trying to rattle you, but you're stronger than that. Here's what we'll do. I'll file an injunction to ensure your safety and make a public statement about the threats. If they think they can intimidate you into silence, they've got another thing coming." "Thank you, Rachel," Marcus said, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I can't do this alone." "You won't have to," she assured him. "We're in this together." As Marcus left Rachel's office, he felt the weight of the threats still lingering, but now it was tempered by the support of his allies. The battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. Later that night, as he sat in his living room, his phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "You were warned." Suddenly, the power in his house cut out, plunging him into darkness. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Marcus's heart pounded as he reached for his phone, its glow now the only source of light in the room. The silence in his house felt oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of his own breathing. He quickly activated the flashlight on his phone and scanned the room. The faint outlines of furniture loomed like shadows, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, the timing of the power outage couldn't have been a coincidence, not after the threats. Marcus took a deep breath and called Clara. She answered almost immediately. "Marcus." "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing the urgency in his tone. "The power just went out," he said, keeping his voice steady. "And I got another text right before it happened. You were warned." "Are you serious?" Clara exclaimed. "Marcus, you need to get out of there. Go somewhere safe." "I'm not running," Marcus replied. "But I am calling the police." "Good," Clara said. "I'll come over too. Stay on the phone with me until they arrive." Marcus dialed 911, his flashlight still scanning the room. After relaying the situation to the dispatcher, he stayed by the front window, watching for any signs of movement outside. The minutes felt like hours, but finally, flashing red and blue lights illuminated his street. Detective Elena Vasquez was the first to arrive. She entered the house cautiously, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. "Judge Price," she said, her voice calm but alert. "Stay here while I check the perimeter." Marcus nodded, grateful for her presence. Clara arrived shortly after, breathless but determined. She rushed to Marcus's side, her phone already out, recording. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Marcus assured her. "Just frustrated that it's come to this." Vasquez returned a few minutes later. "The exterior looks clear," she reported. "But whoever's behind this is escalating. Cutting your power wasn't just a threat, it was a way to show they can reach you anytime." "What's the next step?" Marcus asked. "I'll have a patrol car stationed outside your house tonight," Vasquez said. "And we'll escalate the investigation. The text messages are key. We'll work with your phone provider to trace the source." Marcus nodded, but his mind was already racing. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare him, they were testing him, seeing how far they could push. The next morning, Marcus woke to find a police car parked outside, as promised. Clara had stayed the night, sleeping on the couch, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge, now back in working order. Over breakfast, Clara pulled up social media on her laptop. "You're trending again," she said. "People are rallying behind you, but there are also a lot of less supportive voices." Marcus leaned over to look. The comments ranged from praise to vitriol. "Judge Price is a hero for standing up to this. This is what happens when you poke the bear. He should have stayed quiet. We're with you, Judge. Don't let them silence you." "Social media is a double-edged sword," Clara said. "But the support is there if we use it right." Marcus rubbed his temples. "The support is encouraging, but this isn't about going viral. It's about real change. The threats only prove how much resistance there is to that. Clara nodded. So what's the plan? I have a meeting with the police department this afternoon, Marcus said. They've offered to involve me in their reform efforts, but I need to make sure it's more than just lip service. And after that? Clara pressed. Marcus hesitated. After that, we plan the march. We can't let this momentum die. That afternoon, Marcus arrived at the police headquarters, a stark, imposing building that seemed to loom over the city. Inside, he was greeted by Chief David Harrelson, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for walking the line between reform and resistance. Judge Price, Harrelson said, shaking his hand firmly. I appreciate you coming in. Let's talk. They sat in a conference room, joined by a few other senior officers. Harrelson began by acknowledging the incident involving the rookie officer and pledging the department's commitment to change. We're looking at implementing mandatory anti-bias training and increasing oversight, Harrelson said. And we'd like your input on these initiatives. Marcus listened carefully, his judicial instincts analyzing every word. Training and oversight are a start, he said. But without accountability, they're meaningless. What happens when officers violate these policies? How will you ensure they face consequences? Harrelson shifted in his seat. We're still working out those details. With respect, Chief, those details are the difference between real reform and empty promises, Marcus said firmly. The community is watching. If you want to rebuild trust, you need to show that accountability is non-negotiable. The room fell silent. Finally, Harrelson nodded. Point taken, Judge. Let's revisit the accountability measures. We'll keep you in the loop. As Marcus left the meeting, he felt cautiously optimistic. The department's willingness to engage was a step in the right direction, but the fight was far from over. That evening, Marcus returned home to find another envelope on his doorstep. This one contained a grainy photo of him leaving the police station, with the words, "You can't hide." Marcus's blood ran cold. Whoever was behind this was watching him closely, and they weren't backing down. He texted Clara and Reverend Howard, "We need to accelerate our plans. The march can't wait." As the night fell, Marcus knew the threats would keep coming. But with every step forward, he was more determined than ever to see this fight through. The days leading up to the march were a blur of planning and tension. Marcus, Clara, Reverend Howard, and a coalition of community leaders worked tirelessly to coordinate the event. Flyers were distributed, social media campaigns amplified the call to action, and local media outlets began covering the story with growing intensity. But the threats loomed like a dark cloud over their efforts. The grainy photo left at Marcus's doorstep had been reported to the police, but no leads had emerged. The unknown sender remained elusive, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. On the morning of the march, Marcus stood in the church's back office, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, but the weight of the moment showed in his eyes. Clara entered the room, her phone in hand. "Marcus," she said, her tone urgent. "The turnout is massive. People are pouring in from all over the city." Marcus turned to her, a flicker of hope cutting through his tension. "That's good. We need every voice we can get." Clara hesitated. "There's something else. I've been monitoring social media, and there are some troubling posts. People threatening to disrupt the march. Anonymous accounts talking about sending a message." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Have the police been alerted?" "Reverend Howard already informed them," Clara said. "They're deploying additional officers, but you know how this goes." Marcus nodded. He did know. The presence of law enforcement could either deter violence or exacerbate tensions. It was a delicate balance. The march began just after noon. Thousands of people flooded the streets, their chants echoing off the buildings. No justice, no peace, and accountability now. The sea of protesters carried signs demanding change, their collective energy a force to be reckoned with. Marcus walked at the front of the march alongside Reverend Howard, Clara, and other leaders. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on him, but the sight of the diverse crowd, young and old, black and white, all united for justice, filled him with resolve. As the march approached the downtown square, where the main rally was to be held, the atmosphere grew tense. A line of police officers stood at the perimeter, their expressions unreadable. Some protesters shouted at them, But Marcus and the other leaders worked to keep the crowd focused. "Remember why we're here," Reverend Howard called out through a megaphone. "We're here to demand change, not to fight. Stay peaceful. Stay united." The crowd responded with a roar of agreement, their chants resuming. As the rally began, Marcus took the stage. The square was packed, the air electric with anticipation. He gripped the microphone, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "We are here today because the system has failed us," he began. "Because too many lives have been lost, too many families have been broken, and too many promises have gone unfulfilled." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy fueling his words. "But we are also here because we believe in the power of change," Marcus continued. "We believe that justice is not a privilege, it is a right. And we will not stop fighting until that right is upheld for every single one of us." The square roared with approval, the sound reverberating through the city. Just as Marcus prepared to continue, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. Shouts rang out, and people began to scatter. Marcus scanned the scene, his heart racing. A group of masked individuals had appeared, pushing through the crowd. Some carried signs, but others had objects in their hands, bricks, bottles, and other makeshift weapons. They hurled them toward the stage, their actions sparking chaos. "Get down!" Clara shouted, grabbing Marcus and pulling him behind the podium. The crowd began to panic, protesters scrambling to get out of the way. Police officers rushed forward, forming a barrier between the attackers and the stage. Shouts, screams, and the sound of breaking glass filled the air. From behind the podium, Marcus peeked out to see the chaos unfolding. Reverend Howard stood his ground, his voice booming through the megaphone. "Do not let them divide us. Stay calm. Do not give in to fear." The attackers continued their assault, but the crowd began to push back. Protesters linked arms, forming human chains to block the masked individuals. Others shouted for peace, their voices drowning out the chaos. Marcus stood, his voice steady as he grabbed the microphone again. "This is what they want," he shouted. "They want us to fight each other, to lose focus. But we will not let them win." The crowd rallied around his words, their chants resuming with renewed vigor. The attackers, seeing their efforts thwarted, began to retreat. Police officers pursued them, and the tension slowly began to dissipate. By the end of the rally, the crowd had regained its unity. The march continued, its message undeterred by the attempted disruption. Marcus stood on the stage, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken. As the event wound down, Clara approached him, her face pale but determined. "That was close," she said. "Too close." "I know," Marcus replied. "But they didn't break us. And they won't." Reverend Howard joined them, his voice calm but firm. "This was a test, Marcus. They wanted to see if we'd falter. But we didn't. And now, they know we won't be silenced." Marcus nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. The fight wasn't over, it was only just beginning. That night, Marcus returned home to find another envelope on his doorstep. This time, it contained a single photo, an image of him on stage, mid-speech, with a red X scrawled across his face. His phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. "Next time, you won't be so lucky." Marcus stared at the message, his pulse quickening. Whoever was behind this wasn't done. But neither was he. Marcus sat at his dining table, staring at the photograph with the red X across his face. The ominous message from the unknown number echoed in his mind. "Next time, you won't be so lucky." He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. They were trying to silence him, to break him, but they underestimated the strength of a man who had dedicated his life to justice. The next morning, Marcus met with Detective Vasquez at her office. She looked exhausted, but her determination was palpable. "Judge Price, I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Vasquez said. "The threats are escalating, and whoever is behind this is getting bolder. We've traced the messages to a burner phone, no way to track it further. But the good news is we've made an arrest. One of the masked individuals from the march was caught, and they're talking." "What did they say?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. "They claim they were hired," Vasquez replied. "A group of agitators was paid to disrupt the march and intimidate you. They wouldn't give names, but they hinted at connections to a local extremist group." Marcus exhaled sharply. "So this isn't just about me. It's about silencing the movement. Vasquez nodded. Exactly. But we're not backing down. We've increased patrols near your home, and we're investigating the group. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you take extra precautions. That evening, Marcus convened with Clara, Reverend Howard, and Rachel Edwards at his home. The threats had only brought them closer, solidifying their resolve to push forward with their mission. We can't let them intimidate us, Clara said, her voice steady. The march was just the beginning. We need to keep the pressure on. Reverend Howard nodded. The movement is gaining momentum, but we have to be smart. The next steps are critical. Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. Agreed. I've been in contact with national civil rights organizations. They're ready to step in with resources and media support. But we also need to protect Marcus. These threats aren't idle. I appreciate the concern, Marcus said, but I'm not stepping back. The threats only prove how important this fight is. We're making them uncomfortable, and that's how change begins. In the days that followed, Marcus's story continued to dominate the news. Support poured in from across the country, with public figures, activists, and even politicians voicing their solidarity. The video of the rookie officer's actions, combined with the footage of the march, became symbols of the fight for justice. But behind the scenes, the threats continued. Anonymous messages, cryptic warnings, and attempts to smear Marcus's reputation became a constant barrage. Through it all, he remained steadfast, drawing strength from the community that rallied around him. One evening, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was Chief Harrelson. Judge Price, I have an update, the chief said. We've identified the leader of the extremist group behind the threats. There's enough evidence to make arrests, but we need your help. My help? Marcus asked, surprised. We need you to testify about the threats and how they've impacted your life, Harrelson explained. Your testimony could be the key to dismantling this group and bringing them to justice. Marcus hesitated. The idea of putting himself on the stand was daunting, but the stakes were clear. This wasn't just about him, it was about protecting the movement and ensuring accountability. I'll do it, Marcus said finally. Whatever it takes. The trial became a media spectacle, with Marcus's testimony serving as its emotional core. He recounted the night he was stopped by the rookie officer, the threats he received, and the attack on the march. His words were powerful, painting a vivid picture of the challenges faced by those who dared to demand justice. The case ended with a decisive victory. The group responsible for the threats and violence was dismantled, and its leaders faced significant sentences. The ruling was hailed as a triumph for justice and a testament to the power of resilience in the face of intimidation. Months later, Marcus stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a crowd of reporters and supporters. This victory isn't mine alone, he said. It belongs to every person who marched, every voice that spoke out, and every heart that refused to give in to fear. But the fight isn't over. Justice is a journey, and we must keep walking that path together. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the city. As Marcus stepped away from the podium, Clara, Reverend Howard, and Rachel joined him. The road ahead was still long, but they knew they had made a difference. And for Marcus, that was worth every sacrifice. Months turned into years, and Marcus's fight for justice became a cornerstone of lasting change. Police reform initiatives were enacted, community oversight boards were established, and the movement he had helped ignite continued to grow. Though the threats had faded, Marcus never forgot the price of speaking out. But he also never forgot the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. He had faced the unthinkable, and in doing so, he had shown the world that justice was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. What did you think of Marcus's journey? Were his actions worth the risks? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories like this one. Together, we can keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching.